And we've received more regulation in the last 9 months than we've seen in the last 8 years. So every week we receive 50 pages of rules to review on a different topic. And lab and testing has seen tremendous progress in the most recent week. So Dan, can you tell us a little bit about what's the landscape when it comes to testing and quality control?
Thank you. This is working, right? Okay. Yeah, my name is Dan Walker. I'm a partner at Preti Flaherty, and I'm also the chair of our cannabis practice group. I've been working with Patricia and Wellness for 10 years now. We started this 2009. We received the awards and have been working to grow this ever since. I think as you heard the story from Dr. Wojtowicz, it really started back in, well, even before that, when this is just, this was really unregulated, but in 1999, medical marijuana was legalized in Maine to a certain extent. 2009 was really that was the passage of which allowed for dispensaries and allowed for people in Maine to take it to that next step. I helped draft that law back then and been involved in kind of the policy around it ever since. We've been pushing very hard for transparency and regulation from the beginning on this. We fought and we fought and we fought for testing rules because we could see, this ironically, we're dealing with the most vulnerable populations out there, and there were no testing rules. There were no regulations. We finally passed something, as Patricia was just talking about, I went back and I kind of was recreate over the past week or so. I've been looking back at the history of all this, and back in 2016, the spring of 2016, we passed testing rules in Maine. And again, at this point, we're only talking about on the medical side right now. We haven't gotten to adult use yet. So 2016, as Patricia said, we wanted mandatory testing on the adult use, in the medical marijuana program. A lot of pushback on that. No one's ever died from smoking pot. Why should we test this? What are we worried about? And so at the time, so then the compromise became, again, what Patricia said was, if you put on your label anything that has to do with how much THC is in there, the cannabinoid profile, or any type of contaminants in there, then you need to put a label on it from a state-certified lab, right? So then the punchline, right? There are no state-certified labs at this point, and in 2016, we had Governor LePage in there who wouldn't let anything go. There was no regulations, nothing. I think this is the only bill that he signed or that had anything to do with cannabis during his time there. So this passes in 2016, and we keep at the Department of Health and Human Services, and we keep at it, and we keep at it, and keep at it. One of the rules coming, one of the rules coming, one of the rules coming, one of the rules coming. They never come, ever. Nothing came. And so, one of the reasons why we really got behind legalization at the time was because we said, this will raise the profile. This will make this will create some safety around this. This will create some transparency. This will create some regulation. It did. But that of course took a while, and Governor LePage was still in office at the time. And so, again, this special marijuana committee of the legislature met for a couple years. They worked and worked and worked, and they'd work 4 or 5 days a week straight through the summer. Of course, the governor vetoed that whole effort, and so it came back again, and finally the legislature was able to override it. And part of that process also included a separate, again, another testing regimen in that part as well. That was spring of 2018. Again, Nothing happened. There was no, but at this point we're hearing rumors that something's going on in the bowels of DHHS and CDC, and they're working on something. So then, finally, a new administration takes over, and they hire, a director at the Office of Marijuana Policy, and things got going finally, and they started hiring, and they started cranking out rules. And so since then, since these guys were appointed back in the early winter, we've had a full set of adult use rules, which include testing protocols in them on the adult use side, to some extent. Really, most of it is in here, but just at least they recognize that there's testing facilities out there. So that came out in May. That went through the legislature. It was a major substantive rule, which means it needed to be approved by the legislature, and they're rewriting them now. They're now effective. The effective date was September 19th, and we expect to see them any time now. It'll be they said within the next 60 days. We expect to see them a lot sooner than that. So that was one set. So then we've also seen, since then, we've seen these, there's new testing rules that came out that were adopted by emergency, so they are effective now, but they're also going through a rulemaking process right now. So we just, I went to the public hearing the other day. 2 people testified. So 2 groups testified. However, if anyone has any comment, please review these rules if you're involved in this industry, because the comment deadline is October 10th on that. We also now have track and trace rules that came out as well. So we're going to be tracking, and that's going to be both for the medical side and the adult use side. Finally, so we have and so the other set of rules that have come out again are on manufacturing. So extraction, and all that. So, when we had no rules, now we've got this many rules. So things are coming, finally.
Things are coming, yes. So Chris, tell us, as you're building Nova Lab, what do you think of the upcoming regulation, and what's your vision for building a lab in Maine?
Yeah, so we're focused. We're talking about vulnerable populations here, and Nova, we come from a background of a laboratory industry where the result that you put out can be a life or death scenario for someone. So the quality of that result and the accuracy of it is of utmost importance. And I think the regulations that we have here do a good job. They embody that public safety aspect, both of patients and consumers. So moving forward, though, this is still new science. Legalization has just swept across the nation in the last really 10 years. We're still learning how to test products effectively. We're still learning how to process those products. And we don't know everything, and we have to have an open mind. And I think one of the things when I speak to OMP is suggesting some routine feedback loop that the industry can provide their experience in both the testing, the manufacturing, the cultivation, how it affects that final product safety, to make sure those testing regulations can move and adopt when necessary. We know about the huge vaping crisis right now. There's vitamin E acetate. I can tell you no lab out there right now is testing for vitamin E acetate in any of the vape cartridges. And it's not just vaping, right? Things get processed on mass scale. What you might have the tightest procedure and cleanest process, but upstream or downstream from your process might introduce a contaminant. One of my, not really favorite story, but kind of like eye-opening stories was a cultivator out in California that I spoke to. He was expanding his cultivation facility, long story short, used timber that was grown in a forest contaminated with some pesticides. And his entire crop showed up with that pesticides at very harmful levels. It was actually a pesticide that specifically when it undergoes pyrolysis or vaping or heating, it produces cyanide gas. So there are all these things that can happen, and why testing needs to be implemented in a way, cost-effective and efficient manner to provide those safe products. And I think what we have right now is a good first step. Until it's in practice, we won't see exactly, I think, how effective it can be compared to a lot of the other states that do have testing protocols. I think Maine is on the upper echelon in terms of quality and coverage of what they're proposing. And it's just going to be a conversation and making sure that we take our data and apply it appropriately.
So going back to the current vape crisis, you know, the Massachusetts governor has decided to place a ban on any vaping product, whether they're cannabis or THC. I'm a little concerned that it's not the right answer, because I think it's going to push a lot of people to the black market. As of now, it's pushing a lot of people from Massachusetts to Maine, but to make their purchase. So how do you think we can use quality control, testing, and regulation to address such situations?
Yeah, so this is a huge issue, right? Because the data, if we would take the time and actually look at the data that is out there, it's actually pointing to the illicit market products that are causing these medical emergencies, diseases, right? It's not coming from the tested products. California, their CCIA, I think, put out some research that showed that none of the cases detected in California had come from an approved product sale. Now, so aside from the political pitfalls that are happening there, continuing to capture that data and make it public and push that obviously helps. But we talk a lot about tracking and tracing from seed to sale. We do a very poor job of tracking from sale to post-consumption and effect. And Dr. Warwitz, you see your patients, you're tracking them, but a lot of people are self-treating. A lot of people are they're not patients, they're consumers. We don't know how it's affecting their overall health if they're just taking it for that recreational purpose. So having a method in the regulations in some way, somehow, to track what the health impacts are of these products. Maine started out with their medical cannabis, and THC's never hurt anyone. Well, no, THC maybe not, but the way in which you're delivering it could. Without the proper testing, you didn't know that. What I think what you would find, and what we're finding now with this vape crisis, is we're looking back now, retrospectively, and realizing there actually are a lot of negative effects associated with the products that they were provided and delivered in. So we have to keep an open mind in that sense, but I think the transparency is the key here, and being able to track where these products are coming from and the negative outcomes that people are coming across.
Yes, so if we look locally and then look nationally, nearly every single jurisdiction in the United States that has a medical program or a adult use program has testing protocols in place. This still happened with these testing protocols in place. However, and I've been reading a lot about trying to figure out what's going on to the best of my ability. And it does seem like there was a spike in May and June of this year. And so folks are thinking, and again, this is just what you're reading, that there is some toxicant, that was placed in there, and it does seem to be predominantly coming from the black market. So as much as we can accelerate away from the black market and get tighter controls about what's going on, the less we're going to have these mass societal issues. But then it leads me to, back to this thought in Michael's talk, this has stuck with me since you said it, was that it's hard, you have to pressure wash patchouli off of cannabis. Well, it reminded me of something where I lived in Colorado in the early 90s, and I rented a room in this house, and I had one of these old, nice, Canon AE1 camera. It was my camera at the time, and a leather kind of holder that was in. Put the leather holder on the windowsill, and right next to the windowsill was this little vial of patchouli that the person who had lived in my room before me had left there. My camera still smells like patchouli. This was like, almost 30 years ago, and so I think that this is going to, patchouli is really hard to wash off, and I think there's a lot of, I think that it's a very good analogy for what's happening right now in this industry.
So another thing that I wonder, because we focus a lot about cannabis, medical, adult use, but you also have the booming CBD-only market that now you can find only in gas stations. There's a lot of confusion out there in the mind of consumers about hemp, cannabis, CBD. Where do you think there's some merit in trying to integrate or homogenize kind of like all those regulation at the same time? Because like if you look at CBD in food, I mean it feels like stop and go every 3 months. Our regulators are changing their mind, or how could we I think there should be a group of stakeholders across all of these, but like what are the other things you think we should do from a regulatory or a quality control perspective do about those?
I could start. So, CBD and THC, they're coming from the same plant, really, right? So the science behind and the testing and processes absolutely need to be as one. Now, when you start to look at, well, CBD isn't psychoactive, so it doesn't really need that sort of robust testing, the answer is absolutely. If you go to a grocery store, you want to know that the ground meat you're buying is not contaminated with salmonella or some other bacteria. You want to know that the bag of Doritos you have doesn't have a contaminant like lead in it, right? So these products still need to be safe for a human being to ingest. There's some really good research out there, one paper by Marcel Bon Miller et al. That purchased CBD products from numerous online resources. And what they found was 83% of those products were either improperly labeled or labeled with the incorrect CBD THC potency. Some of them had more CBD than was reported. Some of them had THC and no CBD. Some of them had THC present at levels that if someone was taking that CBD product for the CBD effects, didn't want THC, was potentially against their employer's policy, would have tested positive for THC. So there are absolutely, the list goes on for reasons why you still need testing for CBD products. And the science behind that is so similar to THC. It's the same. There's no reason that they shouldn't be integrated.
I 100% agree. We work with a group that we formed, this group of CBD hemp policy folks out there. Every last person who's involved, whether they're a grower, distributor, retailer, every last person that we've discussed with, and then we're also been connected a little bit to the National Hemp Roundtable. Everybody accepts this fact that this, CBD needs to be tested, and we need, and just like cannabis does. So let me take a small step backwards here. So if we thought that cannabis regulation, law and regulation was confusing, hemp and CBD, and when I say cannabis, obviously, hemp, people know that hemp is a form of cannabis, but with low THC. But from a national perspective, it is even more confusing from a regulatory and a legal perspective. I mean, so in 2014, the feds passed the Farm Act, and that included the ability for folks to grow hemp around the country within state programs. But those programs they had to conform with the feds, and that required there to be these pilot programs set up with universities or special nonprofits. So that went off. That was 2014. So fast forward, and various states did it. Some states followed it, some states didn't. We didn't follow it. So we have a hemp program in the state of Maine, but you don't have to have a pilot project to do it. So it's non-conforming, but we still have it. So then the 2018 Farm Bill kind of allowed states to not have these pilot programs, but you had to follow another set of rules. And then it legalized CBD as well, but the FDA hasn't passed rules or regulations around it. So, so then you come back to the state level again, and so everyone's looking at that going, okay, I think it's legal to do this, and there's as everyone knows, there's a massive interstate commerce in hemp and CBD products, unlike well, there is interstate commerce in cannabis. It's just not as kind of out there and legal. And so, you know, it is happening. It's coming around. And then you have the state of Maine trying to interpret what's going on. And I don't know who's running the I think there's a bunch of different people doing it, but there's some combination of the Department of Agriculture, the CDC, and the Attorney General's office, and they keep shooting out these memos that conflict with each other. And that, so one came out over the winter that Representative Hickman, who's the chair of the Agriculture Committee, fixed by basically declaring that CBD is food, and so when you include it in products, it should not be, you should not have adulterated the product, and so it's legal to sell. But then over the summer, so we thought we had that fixed, and then over the summer, another memo came out from the same group that had then declared that only hemp and CBD products that come from Maine-sourced hemp would be legal, but that's not what the law said, we felt, and so we pushed back. So they said, well, you're kind of right, but we clarified it in another law that was passed at the end of last session, which just went into effect on September 19th. So it's okay again to sell these products. But I think that the bottom line, though, is that, going back to Patricia's question, there needs to be this homogeneity of testing around this, and I think most people who are really involved in it agree. And so I just held up all those rules that have come out over the last year. These are the rules about hemp and CBD. This is it. This is it. Nothing. The latest, and that's really just about how you get a license to grow and who you pay your fee to. And that you do get, there is testing, but it's only around what the THC level is, but nothing else. So there are provisions in the new law, and there are provisions here that would allow for the state to set up a testing program, to set up a labeling and packaging program to create some consistency. But it hasn't happened yet. So we need people to push for that.
So it sounds like finally, THC cannabis is making progress, but then hemp is becoming the blind side. So it's this game of constantly catching up with one and each other, and it's, OMP, I find it striking that these regulators' bodies are totally disconnected from each other, where they should probably learn and reapply from one and another, but it's separate initiatives, and that maybe that's the next frontier, right?
And I think we're really waiting on the FDA to act. Over the summer they had a big public meeting where they were essentially collecting data on CBD, and they have to turn that around and put out some draft guidance. And unfortunately, there's turnover with the director of the FDA. There's also administration-related political things to navigate through. So I think it'll be some time before the FDA comes out with something. Unfortunately, I think with what's happening right now with the vaping crisis might actually push them along to enact some sort of emergency rules around protections, but not really give us enough information to how to implement this program and actually make it safe, commercially viable, etc. So keep our ears peeled. But
so to conclude this panel, if you look at your crystal ball, right, when do you think we're going to have finally lab testing on the ground happening for our cannabis industry in Maine? When do you think this will happen?
So from my perspective, we're starting up our laboratory here in Portland and hope to be testing in the first quarter of next year. So hopefully come in and get started on testing some of these medical products and be ready for when people are actually able to sell their products under the adult use rules, March, April, May, June timeframe. We're hoping. And one thing about testing too is we talk about all these mandatory tests. They're important for safety, but there's also the aspect of testing for the people producing these products that want to know what's in their product in terms of the phytochemicals, because there's a desired effect, right? And that's how dispensaries can help point people in a direction based on those cannabinoid profiles and terpene profiles, which terpenes are not one of the mandatory tests, right? but it's a very important test from a standpoint of the consumer or patient.
This could be happening, right? I mean, the rules have been passed. They were passed through an emergency, so the labs could be certified right now. So testing could be happening right now. And I don't know if anyone's gotten certified within the last week and a half since this law, or 2 weeks, 3 weeks, since this went into effect. Hopefully folks have, and hopefully folks join NOVA, and we don't have a bottleneck into the adult use market. And I do think that going back to medical, again, if folks really want to label appropriately, they're going to have to test the product according to the law. And I've been talking a lot about laws and regulations, but really, in a lot of ways as well, this is really about this industry and needing to self-patrol itself, because the state of Maine and others around, there's zero enforcement going around, And so, we may have all the rules in the world, and there's not going to be any enforcement. And so this is really up to the industry to enforce itself, to set its own high standards, and to regulate itself. And how we do that, I think there's a lot of great minds thinking about that right now, but I think that's something that needs to happen, because the state, and the federal government, we see what's going on with the federal government right now. It's in complete and total dysfunction. I think it's going to be up to this industry to really set its own standards.
So in that vein, the National Cannabis Industry Association just released a petition to the Speaker of the House to ask for descheduling as a way to foster and adopt higher level of regulations. What do you think of this initiative?
So from my perspective, yes, I think descheduling, legalization would give an opportunity to move it from one category to another and put regulations on top. Based on what the NCI put out there, it's actually two separate issues. There's descheduling and then there's regulation. It can be moved from Schedule 1 to Schedule 2 through 4, 5, however many there are, and still be regulated. Opioids are Schedule 2. They're highly, highly regulated. So I think we need to be careful of that conversation. We definitely want legalization. We definitely want regulation. Myself personally, when I think about public safety, it's regulation that needs to come first. Just legalizing without that regulation actually opens up, I think, the opportunity for more people to get their hands on these raw materials and produce illicit products. So in the way that the NCIA talked about legalization, yes, because it comes with regulation.
I agree. Descheduling would be one issue, and then rescheduling, putting it into a different schedule would be interesting. And then you're fully within a lot of ways within the FDA, which again is with the whole opiate crisis. I think a lot of this. I think we can't wait for that. It's gonna take too long for all that to happen. So I think, while yes, I think it would raise the bar and bring in more real pharmacy industry standards into all this around safety and all that. I think there's an opportunity right now to do it now, and we should take it right now and not wait for that.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you.
We're going to take a 10-minute break.